In the vast wilderness of the American frontier, where justice rode slower than vengeance and mercy was rarer than water, some souls were forged not by fortune, but by fire. The crimson cliffs of Arizona Territory stretched endlessly under the merciless August sun of 1882. Jasper Mackenzie guided his faithful stallion Thunder through the narrow canyon, his weathered leather boots hanging loosely in the stirrups. The desert wind carried whispers of dust and sage, but something else caught his attention, a sound that did not belong to this desolate wilderness. Thunder snorted nervously, his hooves clicking against the scattered stones. Jasper pulled the reins gently, his keen gray eyes scanning the rocky terrain. There, nestled between two massive boulders like a broken doll, lay the crumpled form of a young woman. "Easy, boy," Jasper whispered, dismounting with practiced silence. His spurs jingled softly as he approached the motionless figure. The woman wore the remnants of a blue calico dress, now torn and stained with blood and desert dust. Her long auburn hair was matted and tangled, hiding most of her face. Jasper knelt beside her, his calloused hands checking for signs of life. Her pulse was weak but steady. As he gently turned her over, his breath caught in his throat. Strange, deliberate scars crisscrossed her pale arms like some twisted map of suffering. But what made his blood run cold was the mark burned into her left shoulder, a five-pointed star, perfectly formed and unmistakably intentional. The woman stirred slightly, a soft moan escaping her cracked lips. Jasper quickly uncapped his canteen, allowing a few precious drops of water to moisten her mouth. Her eyelids fluttered but remained closed. "Who did this to you?" he murmured, though he expected no answer. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the canyon walls in deeper shades of red. Jasper knew that desert nights could be as deadly as the scorching days. Without hesitation, he lifted the mysterious woman in his strong arms, surprised by how light she felt. Too light, as if suffering had consumed her very substance. Thunder remained perfectly still as Jasper carefully positioned the unconscious woman across the saddle. The old mining cabin was only 2 miles north, abandoned but still sturdy enough to provide shelter. As they rode through the gathering dusk, Jasper could not shake the feeling that this moment would change everything he thought he knew about his solitary life in the wilderness. 3 days passed before the woman opened her eyes. Jasper had tended to her wounds with the crude supplies available in the abandoned mining cabin. Torn strips of his own shirt for bandages, whiskey for cleaning cuts, and water from the nearby stream. The cabin smelled of dust, old timber, and the lingering scent of medicinal herbs he had gathered from the surrounding hills. When consciousness finally returned to her, she gasped and tried to sit up abruptly, her green eyes wide with terror. Jasper raised his hands peacefully, remaining seated by the small fire he had built in the stone hearth. "Easy there, miss. You are safe now. My name is Jasper Mackenzie," he said softly, his voice carrying the gentle authority of a man accustomed to calming frightened animals. The woman pressed herself against the rough wooden wall, her breathing rapid and shallow. I cannot remember," she whispered, her voice hoarse from days of silence. "Everything is dark, like looking into a deep well with no bottom." "What is your name?" Jasper asked, pouring water from a tin cup. She accepted the water gratefully, her hands trembling as she drank. I think it might be Vera, but I am not certain of anything." Her fingers unconsciously traced the star-shaped brand on her shoulder through the clean shirt Jasper had found among the mining supplies. Jasper studied her face carefully. Something about her features stirred a memory, the shape of her nose, the way her eyebrows arched when she spoke. As she turned slightly, the firelight illuminated the branded star more clearly, and recognition struck him like lightning. He moved to an old wooden crate in the corner of the cabin, retrieving a bundle of yellowed letters tied with faded ribbon. His hands shook slightly as he unfolded one particular document, an engagement announcement from 5 years past. The wax seal at the bottom bore an identical 5-pointed star. "Vera Blackthorne," he breathed, the name hanging in the air like smoke. Her head snapped up at the sound. That name. It sounds familiar, like an echo from somewhere far away. Jasper stared at the woman before him, his mind reeling. Vera Blackthorne, daughter of wealthy rancher Edmund Blackthorne, his former fiancée who had vanished without trace 5 years ago. The entire territory had searched for her. Most folks assumed she had perished in the desert or been taken by hostile Apache bands. "You were supposed to be my wife," Jasper said quietly. The revelation hung between them like a storm cloud. Vera stared at Jasper with a mixture of confusion and desperate hope, her fingers clutching the rough blanket around her shoulders. Slowly, fragments of memory began to surface like pieces of broken glass catching sunlight. "My uncle," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of betrayal. "Uncle Silas. He sold me to them. The Iron Wolves." The words came haltingly, each one dragged from the depths of buried trauma. "He told me we were going to visit relatives in Denver. Instead, he delivered me to those monsters at Devil's Canyon." Jasper felt his jaw clench involuntarily. The Iron Wolves are the most ruthless gang in 3 territories. They trade in human cargo, women and children sold to mining operations, brothels, or worse. His eyes hardened, the soft confusion replaced by something cold and determined. "I remember their leader, a man with a scar across his throat who called himself Rattlesnake Pete. They kept us chained in wagons, moving us from place to place like cattle. For 5 years, Jasper. 5 years of hell." She stood suddenly, despite her weakened condition. "I need to learn to protect myself. I need to learn to fight. Vera, you are barely recovered. You need rest and—" "No." Her voice cut through his protest like a blade. "I need to learn to use a gun. I will never be helpless again." Jasper studied her face, seeing something he had never witnessed in the gentle girl he once knew. A steel resolve forged in the fires of unimaginable suffering. After a long moment, he nodded and retrieved a worn leather holster from beneath his saddlebags. "This belonged to my younger brother Samuel," he said, drawing a Smith & Wesson revolver. "He died at Gettysburg, but he would have wanted his weapon to serve justice." Over the following days, Jasper taught Vera the fundamentals of marksmanship behind the cabin. She proved to be a natural, her hands steady despite the trembling that occasionally seized her when memories surfaced. Her accuracy improved with startling speed, driven by a hunger for justice that burned like a forge fire. "Remember," Jasper instructed as she practiced drawing and aiming, "a gun is not about anger. It is about precision and purpose." Vera nodded, her finger resting lightly on the trigger as she sighted down the barrel at a makeshift target. When she fired, the bottle shattered completely. 2 weeks after her recovery began, Vera declared herself ready. The morning sun cast long shadows across the canyon as she strapped Samuel's holster around her waist, the leather still bearing the scent of its previous owner. Her movements had regained their strength, and her eyes held the focused intensity of a predator. "The Iron Wolves have a camp in Black Rock Gorge," Jasper said, studying the rough map he had sketched in the dirt. "According to the last reports from traveling merchants, they keep their human cargo there before moving them north to the mining territories." Vera checked her revolver methodically, each movement precise and deliberate. "Then that is where we start." They rode hard through the desert heat, thunder carrying them both across the unforgiving landscape. The rocky terrain of Black Rock Gorge provided natural concealment as they approached the outlaw camp. Smoke from cooking fires drifted between the towering stone formations, and the sound of rough voices carried on the wind. From their vantage point behind a cluster of boulders, they observed the camp below. A dozen men lounged around several campfires, their horses picketed nearby. Most troubling were the iron cages constructed from mining equipment, currently holding 4 terrified women and 2 young boys. "I count 12 men," Jasper whispered. "We should wait for a better opportunity. Maybe when some of them leave too." Vera was already moving, descending the rocky slope with the silence of a hunting cat. Her transformation was complete. Gone was any trace of the helpless victim Jasper had found among the stones. In her place moved someone forged by suffering into an instrument of justice. The first bandit never saw her coming. Her blade found his throat as he stepped away from the others to relieve himself. The second died as he turned to investigate his companion, his absence. Vera, his revolver speaking once with deadly accuracy. The camp erupted into chaos. Men scrambled for weapons as gunfire echoed through the gorge. Jasper joined the fight, his rifle picking off targets from the heights while Vera moved through the confusion like an avenging spirit. "I know you," shouted a bearded man with gold teeth, recognizing Vera as she approached him. "You were supposed to be working the silver mines in Colorado," your uncle said. His words ended abruptly as Vera's bullet found its mark. "My uncle will answer for his crimes," she said coldly, stepping over his body. When the gunsmoke cleared, the Iron Wolves camp was silent except for the grateful sobs of the freed prisoners. The town of Red Valley squatted in the desert like a collection of weathered bones, its wooden buildings bleached by years of relentless sun. Vera and Jasper rode down the dusty main street, past the saloon where piano music drifted through batwing doors and the general store where flies buzzed around hanging strips of jerky. The land office is there. Jasper pointed to a narrow building wedged between the barber shop and the undertaker. If your uncle filed papers declaring you dead, that is where we will find the records. Vera dismounted Thunder with fluid grace, her hand resting naturally on her gun belt. The transformation from broken victim to confident gunfighter was so complete that several townspeople stepped aside as she passed, sensing the dangerous energy that surrounded her like an invisible aura. The land office clerk, a nervous man with wire spectacles and ink-stained fingers, looked up from his ledger books as they entered. "Can I help you folks? I need to see the property records for the Blackthorn Ranch," Vera said, her voice carrying quiet authority. The clerk shuffled through filing cabinets, eventually producing a thick folder bound with red ribbon. "Terrible tragedy. That young Miss Blackthorn disappeared 5 years ago, presumed dead by Apache raiders, according to her uncle Silas. He inherited the entire spread, 15,000 acres of prime grazing land." Vera opened the folder with steady hands, though Jasper could see the muscle in her jaw twitching. The documents were all there: death certificate signed by a corrupt doctor, witness statements from paid associates, and the final deed transfer that made Silas Blackthorn the sole owner of what had been her father's legacy. "These papers also mention business partnerships," she said, scanning the legal text. "Ezra Carnegie, land speculator, and Judge Silas Gale. What do you know about them?" The clerk glanced nervously toward the door. "Carnegie owns half the businesses in 3 counties. Judge Gale, well, he handles legal matters for folks who can afford his services. Both men are quite influential." Vera studied a particular document more closely. It detailed a complex arrangement where Carnegie would purchase displaced persons from various sources and transport them to mining operations, with Judge Gale providing legal cover through fraudulent work contracts and false identity papers. "They built an entire network," she murmured to Jasper. "My uncle was just one supplier in a larger operation that trafficked human beings across the territory." As they left the land office, Vera's expression had hardened into something that made seasoned gunfighters step out of her path. The scope of the conspiracy was larger than simple greed. It was a systematic destruction of innocent lives for profit. Judge Silas Gale lived in a mansion on the outskirts of Red Valley, its white columns and manicured gardens a stark contrast to the harsh desert landscape. Vera watched from the shadows as servants moved about the property, their movements quick and fearful. The corruption of wealth had built this palace on the suffering of innocence. "Carnegie is having dinner with the judge tonight," Jasper reported, returning from his reconnaissance. "They meet every month to discuss their business arrangements." Vera checked her revolver one final time. "Then we settle both debts at once." As darkness fell across the valley, they approached the mansion through the servants' entrance. The kitchen staff fled without resistance when they saw Vera's cold determination and the weapons at her side. She moved through the house like a ghost, her boots silent on the polished wooden floors. In the dining room, Carnegie and Judge Gale sat at opposite ends of a long mahogany table, discussing their latest shipment of human cargo over roasted beef and expensive wine. Both men were dressed in fine suits that spoke of wealth built on others' misery. "Gentlemen," Vera announced, stepping into the lamplight with her gun drawn, "your business arrangement is concluded." Carnegie, a portly man with a gray beard, dropped his fork with a clatter. "Who are you? How dare you enter my associate's home?" "I am Vera Blackthorn. You sold me to slavers 5 years ago through fraudulent papers and corrupt judges." Judge Gale, recognizing the name, pushed back from the table. "Impossible. Vera Blackthorn is dead. I signed the papers myself." "You signed lies," Vera replied, her voice steady as granite. But tonight, justice finds its voice. The confrontation was swift and final. Both men learned that their wealth could not purchase mercy from someone who had survived what they had inflicted on countless others. When Vera emerged from the mansion, flames were already consuming the structure behind her, along with all the documents and evidence of their criminal enterprise. "Is it finished?" Jasper asked as they rode away from the burning mansion. Vera looked back at the orange glow against the night sky. "My personal revenge is complete, but I understand now that my purpose extends beyond settling old scores. There are others out there who need someone to stand between them and monsters like these." The flames reflected in her eyes, but for the first time since her rescue, something resembling peace settled over her features. She had reclaimed her name, her identity, and her power. Now she would use them to protect those who could not protect themselves. 3 days after the flames consumed the mansion, Vera awoke from a vivid dream that felt more like a recovered memory. A small girl with blonde braids, no older than 7 when they were first captured together, had called out her name in the darkness of a slave wagon. "Mary," Vera whispered, sitting up abruptly in their camp beside a desert spring. "There was a little girl named Mary. She was taken the same day I was." Jasper looked up from where he was tending to Thunder, his hooves. "You think she might still be alive?" The miners at Silver Canyon work children until they die or grow too weak to be useful. If Mary survived, she would be 12 now. Vera stood and began packing their supplies with urgent efficiency. "We have to find her." The journey to Silver Canyon took them through some of the most treacherous terrain in the territory. Rocky paths wound between towering cliffs where one wrong step could send horse and rider plummeting into bottomless ravines. The mining operation sat like a festering wound in the mountainside, black smoke rising from crude smelting furnaces. They observed the camp from a hidden vantage point among the rocks. Children as young as 8 labored alongside desperate men, hauling ore carts and working primitive machinery under the watchful eyes of armed guards. The overseer, a massive brute known as Rattler Joe, carried a whip that he used frequently on anyone who moved too slowly. There, Vera pointed to a slight figure struggling with a cart twice her size. Even at a distance, the blonde hair was unmistakable. "That is Mary." Jasper studied the camp layout. 20 guards, maybe 30 workers and children. "The odds are not favorable." "Then we make our own odds," Vera replied, checking her weapons. "These people have been beaten down so long they have forgotten how to fight. We just need to remind them." That evening, Vera entered the workers' barracks disguised as a new arrival. The conditions were horrific. Dozens of people crammed into a structure meant for half that number, with barely enough food to keep them alive and working. Mary looked up when Vera approached her sleeping area, and recognition flashed in her tired eyes. "Vera, is it really you? I promised I would come back for you," Vera whispered, embracing the girl who had grown thin and hard during their 5 years of separation. Word spread quickly through the barracks that someone had come to lead a rebellion. When dawn broke over Silver Canyon, the workers rose as one against their oppressors. Vera led the charge against Rattler Joe himself, and when the battle ended, the tyrant lay dead and his operation was in ruins. Green Valley nestled in a fertile basin where a clear stream wound through cottonwood trees and wildflower meadows. It was the kind of place that seemed untouched by the violence and corruption that plagued much of the territory. The small community consisted of honest farmers, a few merchants, and families who had come west seeking nothing more than peaceful lives. Vera, Jasper, and Mary rented a modest cabin on the outskirts of town, its front porch overlooking the gentle stream that gave the valley its life. For the first time in years, Vera allowed herself to imagine a different kind of existence, one where she could lay down her guns and simply be a woman again. "Look at this," Mary exclaimed, running her fingers through the clear water. At 12, she was still small for her age, but the haunted look was beginning to fade from her eyes. "I had forgotten that water could be so clean." Vera smiled, watching the girl discover simple pleasures that had been stolen from her childhood. "There are many things to rediscover, little one. We have time now." Jasper found work helping local farmers with their harvest, his strong back and steady hands welcome among the hardworking community. Vera took employment in the fields as well, though she insisted on keeping her gun belt even while picking corn and hauling grain. Some habits, once learned, were too important to abandon. In the evenings, she taught Mary the skills that had kept her alive: how to shoot straight, how to read the intentions of dangerous men, how to move silently when necessary. But she also taught gentler lessons: reading from books borrowed from the town, his small library, cooking simple meals, and tending the small garden they planted behind their cabin. "Why do we need to learn these things?" Mary asked one evening as they practiced drawing and aiming by lamplight. "Because the world has wolves," Vera replied simply, "and sheep who cannot defend themselves will always be devoured." One autumn evening, as golden leaves drifted down from the cottonwoods, Jasper brought out a bundle of papers, the engagement documents that had once bound him to a woman who no longer existed. Without ceremony, he fed them to the fire in their small hearth. "The past is gone," he said quietly, watching the flames consume the yellowed pages. "We are who we choose to be now." Vera nodded, understanding that they were all different people than they had been before their trials. The gentle rancher, his daughter was dead, replaced by someone harder but also more purposeful. Jasper was no longer the simple cowboy who had once dreamed of a quiet married life. And Mary would never be the innocent child she might have been. But perhaps that was not entirely tragic. They had become something more dangerous than their former selves, but also more capable of protecting others who could not protect themselves. Winter had settled over Green Valley when Cole Haywood arrived at their cabin, his weathered face etched with desperation and his clothes bearing the dust of hard riding. The farmer clutched his hat in trembling hands as he stood on their porch, his eyes red from sleepless nights and endless worry. "Miss Vera," he began, his voice breaking, "I heard tell you help folks who have nowhere else to turn. My daughters, Emma and Sarah, they disappeared from our homestead 3 weeks ago. The sheriff says they probably just ran off, but I know better. There have been other girls missing from farms across the county." Vera invited him inside, pouring coffee while he told his story. Emma was 16, Sarah only 14, both good girls who would never leave home without word. Cole had found signs of a struggle near their barn and hoofprints leading north toward the Badlands where law enforcement rarely ventured. "The same pattern repeats across 3 counties, Cole continued. "Young women vanishing, authorities claiming they ran away, families left with no answers and no help." Jasper and Vera exchanged meaningful glances. They both recognized the signs of organized human trafficking, the same evil that had destroyed so many lives, including their own. "We will find your daughters," Vera promised, her voice carrying the certainty of someone who had never broken such a vow. The search for Emma and Sarah Haywood took them deep into outlaw territory, where they discovered a network of kidnappers even more extensive than the Iron Wolves had been. But more importantly, their success in rescuing the Haywood girls and dismantling the criminal operation attracted attention from other desperate families across the territory. Over the following months, Vera found herself at the center of something larger than personal vengeance. Word spread quietly among the honest folk of the frontier about a woman who could accomplish what law enforcement would not, bringing justice to those who preyed on the innocent and helpless. "We need a name," Mary suggested one evening as they planned their next mission. "Something people can remember when they need help." Vera looked at the small cross that hung above their fireplace, made from 2 pieces of charred wood salvaged from Judge Gale's burned mansion. "The fire cross," she said. "We are the fire cross, and we burn away the darkness that threatens the innocent." By the end of their first year in Green Valley, they had established a network of allies throughout the territory. Former victims who had found new purpose, honest lawmen who operated outside corrupt jurisdictions, and ordinary citizens who provided information and safe houses for those fleeing persecution. The Fire Cross had become more than a rescue organization. It was a movement that promised hope to those who had lost everything. 5 years had passed since that first desperate farmer had knocked on their door seeking help. Vera stood on the porch of their expanded homestead, watching Mary practice her marksmanship in the morning light. The girl had grown into a formidable young woman of 17, her movements precise and confident as she put bullet after bullet through the center of distant targets. "Remember," Vera called out, "accuracy without mercy is just another form of cruelty. We fight to protect, not to destroy." Mary lowered her revolver and nodded solemnly. She had learned well the difference between justice and vengeance, between necessary violence and unnecessary brutality. The Fire Cross had taught her that strength without compassion was merely another form of tyranny. The organization had grown beyond anything Vera had originally imagined. Their network now stretched across 7 territories, with safe houses in every major settlement and allies among honest lawmen, reformed outlaws, and grateful families they had helped. The symbol of the Fire Cross, 2 charred wooden pieces bound together, had become a beacon of hope for those who faced impossible odds. Jasper approached from the barn, his hair now showing streaks of silver but his step still strong and purposeful. In his hands he carried a leather satchel filled with correspondence from their various allies and operatives across the frontier. 3 new requests for assistance this week, he reported. A lumber camp in Oregon Territory where workers are being held against their will, missing children in Colorado, and reports of a judge in New Mexico who sells favorable verdicts to the highest bidder. Vera smiled grimly. The work never ended, but that no longer felt like a burden. It felt like purpose. "Which case needs us most urgently?" "The children in Colorado," Mary interjected before Jasper could answer. "Children should not have to wait for rescue." Her words carried the authority of someone who remembered what it felt like to be small and helpless in the hands of monsters. Vera felt a surge of pride watching the young woman Mary had become, strong enough to protect others, but still possessing the compassion that made such protection meaningful. As the sun climbed higher over Green Valley, Vera reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The broken girl found among the desert stones was gone forever, replaced by someone who had transformed personal suffering into universal protection. The cycle of violence and abandonment that had nearly destroyed her youth would not claim another generation if she could prevent it. The fire cross would continue long after she was gone, carried forward by people like Mary who understood that true strength came not from surviving tragedy, but from ensuring others would not have to endure what they had suffered.